The Corner by the r/Na Sleep Story by u/Malyagrel, 1314 Part 1. The First Time Chapter 1. Tuesday evening. I want to be very precise about the first time it happened, because I have gone back to it so many times in the months since that I am afraid of misremembering it. Memory is not a recording. It is a reconstruction. And every time you reconstruct something, you introduce small inaccuracies that compound over time, until the reconstruction is a portrait of what you believed happened rather than a portrait of what actually did. I do not want that to happen to the first time. So let me be precise. It was a Tuesday evening in October. I remember the day because I had come home from a difficult meeting at work. The kind of meeting that requires a debrief with your spouse over dinner, and I had been looking forward to that debrief in the way that couples who are genuinely good friends look forward to telling each other the irritating things that happened in their day. My wife, Lynn, was a good listener in the particular way of someone who has a genuine interest in other people's experiences, rather than simply waiting for their turn to speak. We had been married for 6 years, and I still looked forward to telling her things. I came in through the front door and called her name. She answered from the kitchen, something about dinner being almost ready, and I went to the bedroom to change out of my work clothes. Our house was a modest single story with the bedroom at the end of a short hallway that ran from the living room. I walked down the hallway, changed into the clothes I kept on the chair beside the bed, the ones I wore at home in the evenings, and I was walking back toward the living room when I saw her. She was at the end of the hallway, not in the hallway, but at its entrance where it opened onto the living room. She was standing just around the corner on the living room side, with only her head visible past the edge of the wall. She was looking at me. She was looking at me in a way that I found, in the first fraction of a second, simply odd. Not frightening. People do not usually stand around corners and look at their spouses with their heads at that particular angle, tilted very slightly, eyes very still, expression entirely neutral. People do not usually do this. But it was Lynn, and the kitchen was 20 feet away, and the reasonable explanation was that she had heard me coming back down the hallway and had looked around the corner to say something and had simply not yet said it. "Hey," I said. "What's up?" She pulled her head back around the corner. She disappeared from view. I heard the sound of her in the kitchen, the particular acoustic signature of someone moving between the counter and the stove that I could identify as precisely as I could identify her voice. "Dinner in 2 minutes," she called. I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the corner where her head had been. Then I went to the living room and sat on the sofa and waited for dinner. And the thing in the hallway became one of those small, unexplained moments of daily life that you note, and then set aside, because explaining them is less important than getting on with the evening. We had dinner. I told her about the meeting. She listened and asked good questions and offered an opinion that was better than any I had reached on my own. We did the dishes together. We watched something on television. We went to bed. I did not think about the corner again that night. Chapter 2. The second time was 3 days later, on a Friday morning, and it was different from the first time in a way I noticed but did not yet know how to categorize. I was in the kitchen making coffee before work. Lynn was still in bed, which was normal on Fridays because her schedule allowed her to start later on that day. The house was quiet in the particular way of early morning, that specific quality of domestic quiet in which all the sounds are familiar and warm. The coffee machine, the distant sound of the neighbor's car in the driveway, the particular creak of the floor near the bathroom door that I had been meaning to fix for 2 years. I was looking at the coffee machine, watching it fill the pot, when I felt something behind me. It was not a sound that made me feel it. It was not a cold draft or a change in the light. It was a quality of attention, the distinct and unmistakable sensation of being looked at by someone who is standing still and saying nothing. Any person who has ever been watched without their knowledge knows this sensation. It is one of the most primitive alerts in the human nervous system, older than language, installed by evolution for reasons that require no explanation. I turned around. Lynn was in the doorway of the kitchen. Not in the kitchen, not quite in the doorway, but at the edge of the doorway frame on the hallway side, with one eye and part of her face visible around the edge of the frame. She was looking at me. Her expression was the same as it had been in the hallway on Tuesday, entirely neutral. No smile, no greeting, no indication that she was about to speak. I felt something that was not quite alarm, but that occupied a register adjacent to it, a heightening of awareness, the particular attentiveness of someone whose pattern recognition has flagged an anomaly. "Lynn," I said, "you scared me." She stepped fully into the doorway. She was wearing her robe, the blue one, and her hair was the particular disarray of someone who has just gotten out of bed, and she smiled at me in the ordinary morning smile of a woman who has been woken by the smell of coffee. "Sorry," she said. "I heard you moving around." "Is coffee ready?" "Almost," I said. I looked at her for a moment. She looked back at me. "How long have you been standing there?" I asked. She looked mildly puzzled. "Just walked in," she said. "Why?" I looked at the spot in the doorway where her face had been and then looked at her again. "No reason," I said. "We had coffee, and she made toast, and we talked about the weekend." And the moment in the doorway became the same category of thing as the moment in the hallway on Tuesday. A small, unexplained oddity, the kind that accumulates over the course of any long and ordinary life without adding up to anything in particular. I went to work. I thought about it on the drive. I thought about it in the particular way you think about things on early morning drives when your coffee has not fully taken effect and your mind is sorting through the contents of the last few days, connecting things. I thought about Tuesday and Friday and the quality of her expression in both instances, that specific neutral stillness, and I thought about the way she had not spoken either time, had simply looked, and I thought about the particular angle of her head in the doorway, tilted very slightly, like someone trying to see something at a slightly better angle without moving closer. By the time I reached work, I had filed it under things that did not need a file. Coincidence, early morning grogginess, the ordinary imperfect behavior of two people who have lived in the same house for 6 years and have settled into patterns that do not always require explanation. I was wrong about that. Chapter 3. It becomes a pattern. It happened 4 more times in the following 2 weeks. I found her watching me from around the corner of the living room while I was reading. I found her watching me from behind the open bathroom door while I was brushing my teeth, only the left side of her face visible in the gap between the door and the frame, one eye fixed on me in the mirror. I found her watching me from behind the curtain in the bedroom, which was more alarming than the others because the curtain was floor length, and she was almost completely hidden behind it, only the toe of one foot and the very edge of her shoulder visible from where I stood. And I found her watching me from behind the refrigerator. This last one was the one that made me understand that something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong that has a simple explanation, not the kind of wrong that you can attribute to a quirk of behavior or a lapse of awareness. The refrigerator stood in the corner of the kitchen where the counter met the wall, and it was a standard full-size refrigerator, and it stood flush against the corner on one side. There was no space behind it on the wall side. On the kitchen side, between the refrigerator and the nearest cabinet, there was perhaps 8 inches of clearance. Lynn is not a small woman. She is of ordinary height and ordinary build. She is absolutely not the kind of person who can fit herself into an 8-inch gap between a refrigerator and a kitchen cabinet. But there she was. I had come into the kitchen for a glass of water. The kitchen was dark because it was 11 at night and I had not turned on the light, navigating by the ambient glow from the hallway. And in the darkness of the kitchen, I saw her there, in the narrow space between the refrigerator and the cabinet. Her face turned toward me, almost invisible in the dark but not quite, the whites of her eyes catching what little light there was. I turned on the light. The kitchen was empty. The refrigerator stood in its corner with its 8 inches of clearance on the kitchen side. The space was occupied by nothing but dust and the edge of a cabinet hinge. I stood in the kitchen with the light on for a long time. Then I filled my glass of water and went back to the bedroom and lay down beside my sleeping wife, who was exactly where she always was, on her side of the bed, asleep, her breath slow and even and entirely unconscious. I did not sleep for the rest of that night. Part 2. Looking Closer, Chapter 4. What I noticed when I started paying attention, I began paying deliberate attention the following morning, which was a Saturday. And paying deliberate attention meant noticing things I had previously absorbed without registering. I tracked Lynn's movements through the house with the quiet and systematic focus of someone conducting an investigation they have not yet named as such. I watched her from peripheral vision while appearing not to watch. I timed the intervals between when I last saw her in one room and when she appeared in another. I paid attention to the sounds the house made and tried to map them to her location. What I noticed over the course of that Saturday was this. Lynn moved through the house in a way that was, most of the time, entirely normal. She made breakfast and read her book and called her sister and folded laundry and did all the things a person does on a Saturday. And she did all of it with the familiar rhythms and sounds that I knew as well as I knew my own. The particular sound of her feet on the hardwood in the hallway. The specific way she opened the refrigerator, which made a slight suction sound followed by the small rattle of the jars on the door shelf. The way she always turned the volume on the television up 3 increments from wherever I had left it, because I always had it too quiet and she always had it too loud, and we had negotiated a standing compromise that neither of us fully kept. Normal. All of it normal for most of the day. But there were gaps. Gaps in the sound. Brief intervals ranging from 30 seconds to perhaps 2 minutes, during which I could not locate her by her sounds and during which, if I turned quickly enough, I would catch the edge of something at the periphery of the room I was in. Not always a full image. Sometimes just a shape at the corner of a doorway, there and then not there when I looked directly. Sometimes a slight movement in my peripheral vision, the same kind of movement you perceive when something passes through the very edge of your visual field, fast enough that by the time your focus shifts to that area, there is nothing to see. Twice, I turned quickly enough to see her eyes. They were looking at me from around the corner of the doorway into the living room, looking at me with the same absolute neutral expression, no effect, no recognition, simply looking, the way an animal looks at something from cover, assessing rather than communicating. Both times when I spoke her name, she appeared from somewhere else, from the kitchen or the bedroom or the bathroom, her voice carrying the ordinary note of a person occupied with something, answering her husband's call. Both times, the doorway was empty when I went to check it. I tried 3 times that Saturday to ask Lynn directly whether she was aware of what she was doing, whether she was playing some kind of game that I had not been informed about, or whether there was something going on that she wanted to tell me. I tried to ask this without alarming her, which meant the questions came out oblique and poorly framed, and she answered them with the mild confusion of a person who does not understand what is being asked of them. "Are you feeling all right?" I asked the first time. She said she was fine, that she had a slight headache. Did I want her to get the good painkillers from the top shelf? The second time I asked whether she had been in the hallway around 2 o'clock and whether she had heard a noise. She said she had been in the bedroom reading and had not heard anything. Was something wrong with the house? The third time I simply looked at her for a long moment while she was sitting on the sofa, and she looked back at me with the open and uncomplicated look of a woman who was wondering why her husband was staring at her. And the openness of that look was so entirely at odds with the blank and assessing look from the doorways that I could not reconcile them into the same person. I went and got a beer from the refrigerator and sat back down and did not ask anything else. Chapter 5. The night she was in the room, it escalated on a Wednesday night, 3 weeks after the first time. Lynn had gone to bed before me. This was not unusual. She worked earlier hours than I did and was often in bed and asleep before 10, while I would sit up for another hour with a book or the television. On this particular Wednesday, I was on the sofa with a book, the house quiet around me, the television off, the only sounds the occasional creak of the house settling and the faint traffic from the road 2 blocks over. I was reading and not finding it easy to concentrate because the awareness that had been sitting at the back of my attention for 3 weeks was louder on this Wednesday than it had been on previous evenings. The way a sound you have been trying to ignore gets louder in silence. I was aware of the house in the particular heightened way I had been aware of it since the Saturday of the refrigerator, tracking its sounds, mapping them, noting what was ordinary and what was not. The house was making only ordinary sounds, and then it was not. The sound that was not ordinary was a very small sound, and I am aware that describing it precisely requires more care than the words readily allow. It was the sound of something adjusting its position very slightly in the corner of the room behind me. Not a footstep, not the sound of a person walking or sitting or standing up. The sound of weight shifting by a very small increment, the way a person who has been standing completely still for a long time shifts their weight by a fraction to relieve the pressure on one foot. I did not turn around immediately. I sat with the book in my lap, and I listened to the room behind me, and I thought about the fact that Lynn was asleep in the bedroom, and that the bedroom was 40 feet from where I was sitting, and that between me and the bedroom was a hallway and 2 doors, both of which I would have heard if they had opened. I thought about the space in the corner of the living room behind the sofa, the corner where the bookcase met the wall, the corner that was the darkest part of the room when the overhead light was off and only the lamp beside the sofa was on. The corner that I could not see without turning completely around. The sound came again. The same small sound of weight shifting. I turned around. The corner was dark. The bookcase stood against the wall at the angle it always stood. The books on its shelves were the books that had always been there. The floor beside it was the hardwood floor that covered the whole room, and it was empty, and the corner behind the bookcase was empty, and nothing was there. I sat facing the corner for a long time. Then I turned the overhead light on. Nothing. The room was ordinary in every detail. The corner was the corner it had always been. I went to the bedroom. I opened the door quietly and looked in. Lynn was in the bed, in the exact position she always slept in, on her right side with one arm under the pillow and one above it, her breath slow and entirely regular. I stood in the doorway and looked at her for a long time. She did not move. I went back to the sofa and sat with the overhead light on and did not pick up the book again. I sat in the lit room and listened to the house and thought about what I was going to do next. Chapter 6. The The doctor I took Lynn to her doctor the following week. This required a degree of persuasion because Lynn was not the kind of person who went to doctors voluntarily, not from any irrational dislike of medical care, but from the practical conviction that most things resolve themselves if given enough time, and that the primary effect of seeking medical attention for minor issues was sitting in waiting rooms. I told her I was concerned about the headaches she had mentioned, which was true as far as it went, and added the observation that she had seemed tired recently, which was also true, and the combination of these things was sufficient to get her to make the appointment. I did not tell her doctor what I had been observing. I had considered doing so and had decided against it for reasons that seemed compelling at the time, and that I have since revised my opinion of. The reasons were that I could not be certain I had seen what I believed I had seen, that describing it to her doctor would require me to say things that sounded, in any ordinary rational context, like the description of a person with a significant problem of perception, rather than the description of a problem with his wife, and that I did not want to say anything that would cause Lynn to be evaluated in a direction that was not appropriate if I was wrong. I was too worried about being wrong. The doctor conducted a routine examination. She noted that Lynn's blood pressure was slightly elevated, which it had been for 2 years, and that her sleep patterns were somewhat disrupted, which Lynn attributed to a period of work stress, which was plausible. She ordered blood work. She recommended vitamin D and a reduction in screen time before bed and a follow-up in 6 weeks. On the way home, Lynn said she felt fine and that the headaches had improved and that I worried too much. I said maybe. She looked at me from the passenger seat. "What is going on with you?" she said. "You have been strange for weeks." I looked at the road. "I have been worried about you," I said. "That is all." She put her hand on my arm. Her hand was exactly as it had always been, warm and familiar, the particular pressure of her grip, which I knew as well as I knew anything. She was Lynn. She was entirely and completely Lynn, sitting beside me in the car in the afternoon, her hand on my arm, looking at me with the slightly exasperated affection of a woman who has been married to a worrier for 6 years and has made her peace with it. I wanted so badly to believe that was the complete picture. Part 3. The Thing in the House, Chapter 7. What the camera showed. I bought a home security camera. This is not an unusual thing to do, and I bought it in the way that people buy useful household items, through a delivery service, with no more deliberate concealment than the fact that I had the package delivered to my office rather than the house. I told Lynn that I had installed it because there had been a car broken into on our street, which was true. There had been, several weeks ago, and the explanation required no elaboration. The camera covered the living room and the entrance to the hallway. I set it to record continuously to a cloud storage account that I accessed from my phone. I reviewed the footage every morning before Lynn woke up. For the first 4 days, the footage showed nothing except the ordinary nighttime life of a quiet house. The room was empty. The lamp clicked off on its timer. The streetlight glow came through the curtains. Once, a car passed and its headlights swept across the ceiling in the way that headlights always did from that angle. The house was the house. On the 5th day, at 2:47 in the morning, I saw her. She came from the hallway. She came quietly and without any of the particular sounds that Lynn's movement usually made, none of the characteristic weight distribution of her step, which I had been hearing for 6 years, and which had a specific rhythm I knew without having ever consciously cataloged it. She came as though she were not entirely certain about the reliability of the floor, placing each foot with the slow and tested care of someone crossing ice. She went to the corner behind the sofa. She stood there, She stood in the corner behind the sofa for 1 hour and 43 minutes. I watched the footage at triple speed and it was still an enormous stretch of nothing. The room, the lamp off darkness, the occasional headlight sweep, and in the corner behind the sofa, the standing shape of my wife, completely still for 1 hour and 43 minutes. At 4:30 in the morning, she turned and walked back down the hallway to the bedroom. I watched this footage 3 times. I watched it at normal speed and at triple speed and at half speed. At half speed, I could see details I had missed at normal speed. At half speed, I could see that when she turned to walk back down the hallway, she turned slowly, with the particular deliberate rotation of someone who is turning not because they have decided to leave, but because they have completed something. I could also see, at half speed, that in the moment before she turned, she was not facing the corner. She was facing the sofa. She had been standing in the corner for 1 hour and 43 minutes facing the sofa. Facing the sofa where I sat every evening, looking at the back of the place where I sat, or looking at the place itself in the absence of the person who sat there, with the patience and the absolute stillness of someone who has nowhere else to be and nothing else to do but wait for the person to come back. I sat in my car in the office parking lot and watched the footage for the 4th time. Then I called my brother. Chapter 8. What Marcus said. My brother Marcus is 4 years older than me and has been, since childhood, the person I call when something is wrong in a way I do not know how to address. This is not because Marcus has any particular expertise in the things that go wrong in my life, but because he has the specific quality of a person who listens to an entire account before responding, who does not interject with premature explanations or reassurances, and who gives you the unvarnished version of what he thinks, even when what he thinks is not what you wanted to hear. I told him everything. I told him about the first time in the hallway and the second time in the kitchen doorway and the times after that. I told him about the corner behind the bookcase. I told him about the space between the refrigerator and the cabinet. I told him about the camera footage. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause, the kind of pause that Marcus takes when he is deciding between several things he could say. "You need to go see somebody," he said. "Both of you." I asked him what he meant by both of you. He said that what I was describing could be 2 different things. It could be a problem with Lynn, something neurological or psychological that was causing her to do things she was not aware of doing. Or it could be a problem with me, with my perception of what Lynn was doing. And if the second thing was the case, then getting help was equally urgent. I told him about the camera footage. He was quiet for a moment. "That is harder to explain," he said. "I know," I said. He said, "Does she know you have the footage?" "No," I said. He said, "Show her. Show her the footage and see how she reacts. Because whatever is happening, the thing you cannot keep doing is knowing what you know and not saying anything to her. You are not helping either of you by carrying this alone." This was the correct advice. I knew it was correct advice when he gave it. I want to be honest about the fact that I did not follow it immediately, and the reason I did not follow it immediately was not a rational one. The reason was that I was afraid of the conversation. I was afraid of 2 different versions of it, and both versions frightened me equally. In one version, I showed Lynn the footage, and she watched herself standing in the corner for 1 hour and 43 minutes, and had no memory of it, and the expression on her face in that moment of recognition was something I would have to be present for and respond to, and I did not know how to do that. In the other version, I showed her the footage and something else happened, something I did not have language for, and whatever it was went into a category that I did not yet have a name for and did not want to have a name for. I waited 3 more days. During those 3 days, I watched the camera footage every morning. She was in the corner every night. Chapter 9. The grin on the fourth night after the conversation with Marcus at 11 minutes past midnight, something changed in the footage. She was in the corner. She had been in the corner for 31 minutes, standing with the complete stillness I had come to recognize as her particular stillness, the specific quality of motionlessness that was different from the stillness of an empty room the way a held breath is different from an absence of breathing. At 11 minutes past midnight, she turned her head. Not her body, only her head. She turned it slowly, and the direction she turned it was toward the camera. The camera was mounted at the junction of the wall and ceiling above the entrance to the hallway, angled to cover the living room. From the corner behind the sofa, the camera would be at a roughly 45-degree angle and at head height plus approximately 6 feet. To look at the camera from the corner, a person would need to look up and to the left. She looked up and to the left. The night vision mode on the camera rendered everything in a pale gray-green that drained color and flattened features, and in this rendering her face was a pale oval with the features reduced to their essential shapes. The eyes were darker than the surrounding skin, and in the night vision rendering they caught the infrared light in a way that made them appear to reflect it. 2 small points of reflected light in the pale oval of her face. She was looking directly at the camera. I watched this on my phone in the car at 6:30 in the morning before I went back inside, and what I felt in the moment of seeing her face turn toward the camera was a very specific and total thing that I will describe as precisely as I can. It was the feeling of a boundary being crossed. Not by me, by something else. The feeling that whatever had been watching me from corners and doorways, whatever had been standing in the corner of my living room while I slept, had now turned to look at the apparatus I had placed to observe it, and in doing so had acknowledged that it knew the apparatus was there, and had communicated this acknowledgement directly to me. She knew about the camera. She had known about the camera. For how long, I did not know. And then, in the footage, her face moved. It moved in the way of a face that is doing something deliberate, a slow and considered movement, and what it did was smile. Not a Lynn smile, not the particular shape of the smile I had been seeing for 6 years, which turned up more on the left than the right and creased her eyes in the specific way of a woman who smiles with her whole face. This was a different shape, and it was too wide, and it did not involve her eyes, and it stayed on her face without any of the muscle movement that accompanies real expressions, without the micro movements that real emotion produces in real faces. It was a fixed and deliberate and very wide thing, and she held it there while she looked at the camera, and the night vision rendering gave it the quality of something from a very old photograph, flat and certain and entirely without warmth. Then she turned back to face the sofa. I put my phone in my pocket and went inside. I did not go to work that day. Part 4, what she was Chapter 10, the conversation I showed Lynn the footage that morning. I showed her the footage from the first night, the clip of her walking from the hallway to the corner and standing there for 1 hour and 43 minutes and then walking back. I showed it to her on my laptop at the kitchen table, with the volume low because there was very little sound on the recording anyway, and I watched her face while she watched the screen. She watched the full clip. She watched it in silence. Her expression changed during the watching in a way that I tracked carefully, because the changes told me things. At the beginning of the clip, when the figure appeared from the hallway, her expression was attentive and confused, the confusion of someone trying to identify what they are looking at. As the clip continued, and the figure stood in the corner without moving, the confusion gave way to something more specific, a kind of focused alarm, the alarm of recognition rather than incomprehension. By the end of the clip, when the figure turned and walked back to the hallway, Lynn's face was very still. "I do not remember doing that," she said. Her voice was precise and careful in the way of someone who is being extremely accurate. I asked, "Are you sure?" She said, "I do not remember getting up last night. I have no memory of being in this room after we went to bed." I asked, "Has this happened before? Have you woken up somewhere and not known how you got there?" She looked at me for a moment. "Not exactly," she said. "But I have been having strange dreams, very vivid ones, the kind where you cannot tell whether you are dreaming or awake. And I have woken up tired in the mornings, more tired than I went to bed, as though I was doing something all night instead of sleeping." I told her there were other clips. I told her about the corner behind the bookcase and the 8-inch space beside the refrigerator. I told her about the doorways and the hallway and all the other instances. And I told her in the same precise and sequential way I had told Marcus, leaving nothing out. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked me to show her the second clip, the one from the night before, the one where the figure in the corner turned its head and looked at the camera and smiled. I showed her. She watched it. She watched the pale oval of her own face turn toward the camera, watched the smile spread across it, watched the face hold the expression for 8 seconds and then turn back. "That is not me," she said. I looked at her. I looked at the screen. The figure in the corner and the woman at the kitchen table had the same face, the same hair, the same build, the same hands resting on the kitchen table surface. "Lynn," I said. She looked at me and her eyes were clear and present and entirely hers, the particular dark brown of them, with the small fleck of amber in the left iris that I had known since before we were married. "I know what it looks like," she said. "I know it looks like me. But that is not me. I do not know what that is. But it is not me." I sat with that for a long moment. Then I asked, "What do you think it is?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked at the frozen image on the laptop screen, the pale oval face and the too wide smile, and she looked at it the way you look at something you are trying to understand from first principles, without prior knowledge to help you. "I think," she said slowly, "that something is wearing my face to get close to you. And I think it has been doing this for longer than either of us knows." Chapter 11. The research. Lynn was a more systematic researcher than I was. This had always been true. Where I approached a problem by circling it, she approached it by going directly to the center and working outward. In the 2 weeks following the conversation over the footage, she researched with the focus and thoroughness of someone who has decided that understanding the problem is the first step to addressing it, and that the understanding is not optional. She read about sleepwalking and its variants, about parasomnia, and the spectrum of behaviors that occur in the gap between sleeping and waking. She read the medical literature, which was extensive, and she read the case studies, which were sometimes relevant and sometimes not, and she came back from each reading session with the same conclusion, which was that what the footage showed was not consistent with any documented form of parasomnia. Sleepwalkers do not stand in corners for 1 hour and 43 minutes facing their spouse's preferred seat. Sleepwalkers do not turn slowly to look at security cameras and smile. She read about other things. She read about phenomena that existed in the space between clinical literature and the accumulated experience of people who had reported similar things and had not been taken seriously by clinical literature. She read about the accounts of people who had described experiences of sharing their living space with something that was not their spouse, but wore their spouse's appearance, that came and went in the hours while they slept, that seemed to observe them with a patience and a consistency that suggested purpose rather than accident. There was more of this material than either of us had expected. It came from many places and many times and many cultures, and the consistency across the accounts was not the consistency of people who had read each other's stories and borrowed their details. It was the consistency of people who had encountered the same thing and described it in the vocabulary available to them, which varied by era and by culture, but resolved. When you stripped the vocabulary away and looked at what was being described, into the same phenomenon, something that watched, something that learned, something that was patient enough to spend weeks or months in the preliminary stages of whatever it was doing before it moved to whatever came next. Lynn found 3 accounts in which it had moved to what came next. She did not show them to me immediately. She came to me on a Saturday afternoon with the expression of someone who has information and is deciding how to deliver it. And she sat beside me and she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you respond." I said I would. She told me what she had found. She described the 3 accounts. She described them clearly and without minimizing them in the same voice she used for all factual information, and I listened. And when she finished, I sat with what she had said. In all 3 accounts, the thing that watched eventually stopped watching. It moved from the corners and the doorways into the center of the rooms. It moved from looking to something else. In all 3 accounts, the people who had been watched did not write the rest of their own story. Someone else wrote it. I looked at the window. The late afternoon light was coming through it at the angle it came through on October Saturdays, warm and slightly amber, the same light it had always been. "What do we do?" I said. She said, "I have an idea, but you are not going to like it." Chapter 12. The idea was that one of us had to be awake when it came. Not watching. Not visibly alert. Sitting in the living room in the ordinary posture of someone reading or watching television, appearing to be absorbed in the activity, but actually awake and watching in the peripheral way that Lynn had determined, from reading the accounts, was the way to watch it without alerting it. Because what the accounts agreed on, across their different vocabularies and their different cultural framings, was that the thing that watched did not like to be directly watched in return. It adjusted when it was directly observed. It stepped back. It waited. It was patient enough to wait for as long as it needed to. But if you watched it without appearing to watch it, the account suggested you could observe something that direct watching did not reveal. I asked what that was. Lynn said where it comes from and where it goes. We did not both stay up. That was part of the plan. We agreed that Lynn would go to bed at the normal time, so that the house would appear to be in its normal state, and I would sit in the living room with the lamp on, and a book in my lap, and I would watch from the periphery of my vision, and I would not directly look at anything I saw until I understood what I was looking at. I want to be clear about how difficult this was. I want to be clear about sitting in my own living room in the ordinary light of the lamp. I had been sitting under for 6 years, with the book I had been failing to read for 2 weeks open on my lap, watching from the edges of my vision, and knowing that at some point in the night, something was going to come from the hallway and go to the corner behind the sofa and stand there looking at the place where I sat. I want to be clear about how difficult it was not to look at it directly when it came. It came at 12:40. I felt it before I heard it, the same shift in the quality of the room's attention that I had felt on the night in the kitchen. Then I heard the footsteps, barely audible, the tested and careful footsteps I had seen on the camera footage. Then, in the edge of my left peripheral vision, I saw it cross from the hallway to the corner. It went to the corner. It stood in the corner. I sat with the book and I did not look at the corner. I kept my eyes on the page and I kept my breathing even, and I watched from the absolute periphery of my vision. It stood in the corner for a long time, and then it moved, not back toward the hallway, sideways. Slowly, in the careful, tested way of its movement, it moved along the wall from the corner toward the sofa. I tracked it at the very edge of my vision and kept my eyes on the page. It stopped beside the sofa. It was standing beside the sofa, at the end nearest the arm where I always sat, perhaps 2 feet from where my hand rested on the armrest. I could feel the change in the room's quality at that distance, a slight drop in the temperature that was not imaginary, that my skin registered as fact. I did not look at it. I turned a page. It stood beside the sofa. I kept my eyes on the page. Seconds passed. They passed with the particular weight of seconds that are not ordinary, that carry more content than their duration suggests. Then the lamp went off, not gradually, instantly. The room was lit, and then it was dark. And in the dark, I felt what I can only describe as a shift in the pressure beside me. And I heard a sound that was not a footstep, but was a sound that something standing very close to me made when it moved. And then the room was the room, and the streetlight glow came through the curtains, and the sofa was empty beside me. I sat in the dark for a very long time. Then I turned the lamp back on. It turned on as ordinarily as it always had. The room was the room. I was alone in it. I went to the bedroom. Lynn was in the bed, asleep, exactly where she always was, except that on the floor beside the bed, on her side, arranged with a neatness that was its own communication, were her slippers. The slippers she had been wearing when she went to bed, which she always wore to bed because the hardwood floors were cold, and she always took them off and left them beside the bed when she got under the covers. They were arranged neatly on the floor, toes pointing outward, side by side. They were still warm. Part 5. What we understood, Chapter 13. What we understood. I will not describe in detail the days that followed the night with the lamp. I will say that they were the hardest days of my adult life, and that they required of me things that I was not sure I was capable of, and that I managed them because Lynn was beside me, and because the alternative to managing them was a passivity that neither of us could afford. We understood, in the days after the night with the lamp, several things that had not been clear before. We understood that what had been in our house was not something that had arrived recently. The accounts Lynn had found suggested that things of this kind did not arrive quickly. They arrived the way weather arrived, gradually and from a distance, their presence accumulating over time the way pressure accumulates before a storm. And by the time you noticed them, they had been present far longer than you knew. We went back through our memories of the year and found moments that we had explained away in the individual, and that now, in the aggregate, pointed at something. Small things, the occasional misplaced object. A period of 3 weeks in the spring when Lynn had been inexplicably exhausted regardless of how much she slept. A night in July when I had woken at 2 in the morning, with the certain conviction that I was not alone in the room, and had lain in the dark for 20 minutes before the conviction faded. We had not connected these things. Now we connected them. We understood that it had been studying us. The watching was not random. It was the gathering of information, the patient accumulation of knowledge about our habits and our rhythms and our relationship and our weaknesses, the kind of knowledge that something without its own face would need to accumulate before it could use another face effectively. It had been learning Lynn, learning her movement and her timing and her expressions, and it had been learning me because I was the person the face was meant to be presented to, and to present the face effectively required understanding how I looked at it. We understood that it was not finished. The accounts Lynn had found described a progression. The watching was the first stage. The movement from the corners into the center of the rooms was the second. The third stage was not described in terms of the thing's behavior, but in terms of its results, and the results were the end of the accounts, which other people wrote, and we did not want to reach the beginning of our own third stage. We understood, finally, that we were going to have to leave the house. Chapter 14. Leaving a house that you have lived in for 6 years is not a simple logistical act. It is an act that requires you to look at every object in every room and make a decision about it. And the decision is compounded when you are leaving in a hurry, and when the reason you are leaving is one you cannot fully disclose to the friends and family members who offer to help. We told people we were moving for work reasons. This was not entirely untrue. We did not tell people about the footage. We did not tell people about the corner or the slippers or the smile. We told Marcus because Marcus already knew most of it, and he helped us with the actual moving without asking questions we could not answer, which was one of the most meaningful things anyone has ever done for me. We found an apartment in a building that had been constructed recently enough to have no accumulated history, on the 4th floor, above the ground. We moved in on a Saturday in November, almost exactly 1 month after the night with the lamp, and the apartment was clean and bright and full of other people's sounds through the walls and the ceiling, footsteps and voices, and the particular communal hum of a building with many residents, all of which were, in their own way, deeply reassuring. We did not bring the bookcase. We did not bring the sofa. We did not bring anything from the living room. We told the moving company to dispose of it, which they did for an additional fee, and they loaded it into a separate truck and took it away. And that was the end of the furniture that had been in the room where it had stood. Our first night in the apartment, Lynn and I lay in the new bedroom with the unfamiliar sounds of the building around us and the particular quality of light from the street below, which was different from the light that had come through our old bedroom curtains, because the streetlights at this intersection were a different color and at a different angle. Everything was different. I wanted different. Lynn turned to look at me. She asked very quietly, "Do you think it follows?" I thought about the account she had found. I thought about what they said and what they did not say. "I do not know," I said, honestly. She looked at the ceiling. "The accounts did not describe what happened to people who left," I said. "They described what happened to people who stayed. I think leaving is not something that was tried very often." Lynn was quiet for a moment, because most people did not understand what they were dealing with quickly enough, she said. They stayed because they thought it was something else, something that would resolve. "Yes," I said. We lay in the dark and listened to the apartment building. That first night was ordinary. I noted its ordinariness with the careful attention of someone who knows that the ordinary and the not ordinary can be separated by a very small thing. And I lay in the ordinary apartment with my ordinary wife in our ordinary new life. And I was grateful in a way that I had not been grateful for anything since before October. Chapter 15. After I am writing this 4 months after we left the house. The apartment has been ordinary for 4 months. I check the security camera footage every morning, not because I expect to see something, but because the habit was established and the expectation of not seeing something requires confirmation each morning to remain an expectation rather than an assumption. And I do not want it to become an assumption. The footage shows the living room. The new sofa we bought, which is a different color and a different shape from the old one. The bookcase we bought, which is a different style and is placed against a different wall. The hallway entrance from a different angle. The corner behind the new sofa, which is empty every morning when I check. Every morning. Not every morning so far. Every morning. I believe in the distinction. Lynn has been sleeping well. The exhaustion that characterized the autumn months resolved within 2 weeks of leaving the house, and she has said several times that she feels more rested than she has in years, which is the most specific evidence I have for the theory that whatever was there was drawing something from her that she was not consciously giving, and that removing herself from its vicinity ended the drawing. I have thought, in the 4 months since, about the question of what it was. I have thought about it the way you think about a concept that you can walk around but cannot enter, something that has a definite shape, but that the available language does not fit exactly. I do not know what it was in the sense of a category or a name. I know what it did. I know that it was patient and it was persistent and it was purposeful, and it had been at work for longer than I knew. I know that it learned my wife's face and movements with enough precision to deceive her husband from across a room, which required a kind of attentiveness that I find, even now, more disturbing than almost anything else about it. Because attentiveness of that quality implies something that was very interested, not in the abstract way that a process might be described as interested, but in the specific way of something that has a subject and an object and an intention linking them. It was very interested in me. I do not know why. I have spent 4 months wondering why, and I have not arrived at a satisfying answer, and I am not certain a satisfying answer exists. The accounts Lynn found did not explain the why of it. They described the what and the how with the authority of direct experience, but the why was not accessible to people who were the subject of the observation rather than its origin. The why was inside whatever was doing it, and whatever was doing it was not disclosing it. I have thought about the smile. I have thought about it more than I have thought about almost anything else from that period, more than the corner and the slippers and the lamp going off. The smile was the only moment in the entire sequence when it communicated something directly, when instead of simply doing what it was doing, it turned and acknowledged that it knew I was watching and gave me something in response. And what it gave me was a smile, not Lynn's smile, something else wearing the shape of a smile, something that had observed human faces long enough to know that the configuration of a smile communicated a particular thing, and had produced it deliberately, and had aimed it at the camera. I have thought about what it was communicating. The best answer I have reached is that it was not communicating anything specific. It was communicating awareness. It was telling me that it knew, and that knowing did not change anything about what it was doing, and that the not changing was itself the communication. It had seen the camera and it had smiled and it had turned back to face the sofa, and the message in that sequence was simply, I see you seeing me and I am still here. It is not still here. I believe that. I need to believe that, and I believe it. But the house on the old street is still there. Someone else lives in it now. I do not know them. I have not attempted to contact them because I do not know what I would say. I have thought about what I would want someone to say to me if I were in that house and it were still early, and I had not yet noticed the small things, the corner, the gaps in the sound, the quality of the silence. I have thought about what advice I would have wanted before the first Tuesday in October. I think the advice would be, pay attention to the things you cannot explain. Do not explain them away. The explaining away is a kindness you do to yourself in the short term that costs you more in the long term than any alternative, because the things you explain away do not resolve themselves just because you have decided not to address them. They continue. They accumulate. They become the footage on your phone in the parking lot, the slippers on the floor, the lamp going dark. Pay attention. Take the unexplained seriously. And if you have a camera covering your living room and you review the footage and you see something standing in the corner behind the sofa, do not wait. Do not wait to see if it escalates. Do not wait to understand it fully before you act. Leave. Chapter 16. The last entry. I checked the footage this morning as I always do. The living room was empty. The new sofa was empty. The corner behind the new sofa was empty. The hallway entrance showed the hallway, which was empty. Everything was as it should be. I was about to close the app when I noticed something. It was a small thing, and I want to be precise about it the way I want to be precise about everything in this account, because precision is the best tool I have and I intend to use it. In the corner of the hallway, at the very edge of the camera's field of view, there was a shadow. This is not unusual. Hallways have shadows. The light in our hallway comes from a single fixture in the ceiling midway along its length, and the corners at either end are naturally darker than the center. The camera's night vision mode renders these darker areas as deeper gray, and in the deepest gray areas, the image has a grain to it that can produce the appearance of forms that are not there. This is what I told myself. Then I looked at the shadow again. It had a shape. Not the formless shape of a naturally occurring shadow. A shape with a specific quality of edge on one side, the side that faced the camera, a quality that I recognized from the footage of the corner behind the old sofa, the quality of a form that has a definite boundary between itself and the surrounding space. And the shape was slightly tilted, very slightly, the way a head tilts when someone is looking at something from around a corner. I watched the footage for the next 3 minutes. The shadow did not move. Then Lynn appeared from the bedroom doorway, still in her robe, and she walked to the kitchen, and the sound of the coffee machine started. And the apartment was the apartment it always was at 6:30 in the morning, warm and ordinary and full of the sounds of two people beginning a day. I looked at the shadow in the corner of the hallway for another minute. Then I closed the app. Then I opened it again. The corner of the hallway was empty. I sat in the bedroom for a moment with my phone in my hand. Then I got up and went to the kitchen where Lynn was making coffee, and I sat at the table and watched her, the ordinary movements of a person doing an ordinary morning thing, and she turned and looked at me over her shoulder and said, "You look terrible. Did you sleep?" "Yes," I said. She poured me a coffee and set it in front of me and sat down across the table. She looked at me for a moment with the clear and direct look that I knew, the one with the amber fleck in the left iris, the one that had been looking at me from across various tables for 11 years, and that I knew the way I knew almost nothing else. "What is it?" she said. I looked at her. I thought about the shadow in the hallway corner. I thought about the specific quality of its edge. I thought about the way a head tilts when it is looking at something from around a corner. "Nothing," I said. I did not believe myself when I said it. I picked up my coffee. I did not look at the hallway. I looked at my wife, and I held the coffee cup with both hands, and I tried to decide whether not looking at the hallway was the bravest thing I had ever done or the most foolish. I have not decided yet. The end.